is Tuesdays with Ted. And I'm going to go back and count them all so I can say this is interview number whatever. I've been doing this for over a year and it's been so much fun. But today we have another special guest, Jürgen Strauss, who I met through podcasting. Welcome.
Thanks, Ted. It's a privilege to be on Tuesdays with Ted, and congratulations on achieving the 50 milestone. So I guess you're well over 50 now.
I guess I should keep track. First of all, you got to tell us a story about your headphones. I love the story you just told me.
Yeah, well, these headphones, they're Sennheiser HD 440s, and I suspect that they might have, well, they certainly have sentimental value for me, but I suspect they might have vintage value as well. These I purchased as a teenager when my parents told me that the music on my stereo system in the room was too loud, and they kept hounding me to turn it down. So I spent some of my hard-earned pocket money from washing cars and so on to purchase these headphones, and that solved one problem. Now they then, many years they spent living in a box somewhere in the cupboard because I'd outgrown them basically and moved on to Walkman with little Bluetooth headsets and so on. Mm-hmm. And when I started podcasting, I had another set of headsets, and then eventually I upgraded my system, put a mixer in, and the mixer had this big plug for those headsets, and I thought I could use another headset, and I pulled out this stereo headset, replaced the worn pads with these bright yellow ones, and plugged it in, and I thought, wow, the quality of this thing is absolutely amazing, better than anything else I'd purchased in the last 50 years, more than 50 years.
Yeah, you always think technology is better than it used to be, but
that's right. Yeah.
Not with the headphones. So how did you get started in podcasting?
Well, as a mentor of mine suggested it to me as a great positioning exercise. Curiously enough, I had been a fan of listening to audiobooks for most of my corporate career back when they were still on cassettes. And then when podcasts came along, that I added that to my listening repertoire and thought, these are great. But always thought that this was something that people who had this radio studio kind of setup did, and never really considered it was something I could do. This mentor had actually set up a video studio, so his background was in video production. And when he suggested that, he said, come and have a look at the studio. I'll show you the minimum you need to get started and build a home studio. And when he showed me that, I thought, wow, I can do that. And so I set out to start the podcast, and immediately it dawned on me then, because I'd just come out of a corporate career where I had lots of international connections at very high levels of some very innovative companies. And it dawned on me, hey, that's a way I can reach out to those folks professionally again and learn more about what they're doing and what they're up to, keep up to date with them. And that's how I started the podcast. And before I knew it, they started introducing me to more people, and it developed into what I call the flywheel, which is something that is just like, it's got its own momentum. It's really hard to stop. And we're about to publish episode 500 in a month's time, I think. We have recorded about 515.
Nice.
So it's been a pretty amazing journey.
It is a flywheel effect, I have to say, because I started a podcast years ago. Then I took a job for a couple of years, so I stopped doing it. And now it's like really taken off in the last few years. Do you know why it's really gotten so popular lately?
Well, I think people are starting to understand that it's pretty easy to get started. And with the popularity of smartphones taking off and all the different, like the little buds that you can put in your ear and listen to while you're on the treadmill or while you're out walking, or recently, of course, the apps have been built into the radio systems inside of cars. So you don't even have to have any other device. If you hop in the car and you're commuting for half an hour, you just turn on the radio and pick podcasts. Mm-hmm. So they've just become so accessible as listeners, and people really value that they can listen to information. They can listen to some fascinating topics of, immense variety, and be entertained as well at the same time.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm on a lot of, probably 2 or 3 times a week, I'm on someone's podcast or a webinar or something. And most of my business comes from that because they get to hear what I'm saying, not just
Mm.
read what I stand for. They actually get to know me. Do
Yeah,
you find that
that's
with
right.
you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real opportunity for people to get to know you, and particularly if you take the approach that on the podcast you're there to serve the audience and provide value in an area that you know something about, then not only do they get to know your personality, they get to know what is it that you know, how could you possibly help me as a listener to this podcast, and do I like you? Do I trust you? And
Right.
of course, I'm getting to know you. So it's that know, like, trust factor that classically we want to go through before we actually do business with somebody.
Yeah. In a 30-minute interview, you get to know, like, and trust people faster than following them on social media for years sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And what social media, particularly if it's just the written word, doesn't really capture is the essence of the personality, and that feeling of, yes, I think I like that person. I think I could work with that person. I think I would enjoy working with that person. You don't necessarily get that just in the written word in social media. Of course, video helps a lot to overcome that.
Yeah. Well, that's what emojis are for, right?
Yeah.
So you talk about how you can make money with your podcast, not from it.
Hmm.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, the kind of old school thinking, and some of the people that got into podcasting in the very early days were very successful with this, of course. But I think that boat has left the harbour, and that old school thinking was, I'll build a podcast, I'll get lots of sponsorship, I'll have people advertise on it, and I'll earn lots of money. Today, that you can still do that, of course, but both sponsorship and podcasting, and advertising on podcasts, those advertisers or sponsors look for the number of downloads, and they talk in terms of millions of downloads. And it's kind of the kind of money that they spend is cents per millions of downloads. So you can imagine, to bring sponsors on board, to invest the time in that, is not really very effective in terms of earning money from sponsorship, from advertising. So the way I like to approach it is the podcast is the start of a conversation, and to use it to continue those conversations once the connection has been made through the podcast, and then continue nurturing those relationships that you've built through the podcast, whether it's with guests, whether it's with hosts whose podcast you've been a guest on, and mostly it's with listeners who've heard your conversation, who've heard you present, and who like what you have to say, and also who have issues or problems that they believe you have the ability to solve for them. So that's
Yeah.
what I mean by with the podcast. So the podcast's kind of a tool to begin those conversations, to build those relationships or start those relationships. And then you have to do more afterwards, continue the conversations, continue to nurture those relationships, which then leads to business opportunities.
So, like, at the end of this, in the show notes, we'll have a link to your website so people can get to know you and continue the conversation you're starting right here.
Excellent. Yep. And
Yeah.
that's usually how those conversations keep going.
And you talk about podcasting, build relationships, and start with the impact.
Yeah, that's right. So I like to think of podcasting as a relationship game. It's really all about starting off with knowing who I am and what's my message, and what are my strengths, and where can I help people? What are the problems that I can help people with? Or where can I be of service to people that they really value? And then, who are those people? Who is my dream audience, and how can I get in front of them? So that's the relationship part at the core, and then we've built our process to look like a flywheel that follows on from that. So
Yeah.
a lot of it really is continue the conversations, continue to nurture the relationships, and then of course there's lots of systems that underpin all the steps of the process.
So you should probably have an interesting topic that's relevant right now, not something that was popular 2 or 3 years ago. If
Yeah.
you're talking, which I see that a lot. People are still talking about things that happened 2 or 3 years ago. It's like you have to be relevant here, current.
Mm. Yeah,
And
well,
we were
it's the
talking earlier. I kind of discovered something. I've been on literally hundreds of interviews over the last few years, and I never kept track of them in a spreadsheet or anything. So I Googled my name and then said podcast, and hundreds of websites came up with listings of all the episodes I've ever been on. And we were talking about, you had a really good tip on how people can keep track
mm.
of things like that.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of services that track podcasts, and one of the most popular search engines specifically for podcasts is Listen Notes. So if you go to listennotes.com, and you need to create an account there, but it's free to create an account, and then you can save playlists. So saving playlists is very helpful if you look at a podcast and say, well, I like this episode, so I'm going to listen to that when I'm next in the car, and then add another episode. And so you can build a playlist of different episodes from different podcasts. So what I've done in Listen Notes is built a playlist that are my guest appearances on other people's shows. So it's a whole lot of different podcasts, single episodes, built that playlist. What I can do with that playlist is embed that in my website. So I've got a page on my website that essentially is my guest profile for going on to podcasts. I send people there when I ask them, or when they ask me if I'd like to be on their show. And I say, here's my page. There's some information there about me relevant to coming on and speaking to you on your podcast, as well as all my guest appearances. So the host can easily see different guest appearances. If they're interested, they can listen into a couple of them just to get an idea of how I show up on a show.
So how do you get guests for your podcasts?
Well, there's probably three main ways that I guess get guests. The first one is recommendations from other guests or from listeners. So I have a question at the end of my podcast for every guest, and I say, who else should I get on this show? And 9 times out of 10, people will suggest one person. Often, some people suggest a couple, and many guests come back later on and keep suggesting new people. So I'm obviously front of mind at times when they meet somebody new or they do business with somebody new and they think that person would be a great guest for the InnovaBuzz podcast. So they send me an email. I had 2 emails yesterday of someone who was a guest on our show about 6 or 8 months ago. And they said, hey, I'd like to introduce you to this person. I think they'd be a great guest on your show. So that's probably the major way we get podcast guests. And there's not much that I need to do to keep that part of the flywheel turning. It's really just asking that question at the end of each show.
Right.
The other way that has grown quite substantially as the podcast has grown is people pitching us through either directories where we're listed, or they've heard somebody on the show that they're connected to, and they then pitch us and say, hey, we'd like to come on your show. Here's what we'd love to talk about. This is what we think we can bring to the table. So that's the second one. And then the third one is when I meet people or do business with people who I think would add value to the show and be a great guest, I simply ask them. So I've built a relationship through either meeting them at a networking event or meeting them at an online event or doing business together. So some of the vendors that supply us with services or software, I've asked them would they like to come on the show as a guest and talk about how they do things. So they're the three primary ways that I get guests on the show.
Yeah, I can't remember how we actually met. Was it through LinkedIn or was it? I don't
Could have
remember.
been on an online networking event or somebody introduced us.
Yeah, yep. That's all about relationships, like you
Yeah.
said. And one other thing you said was like little things make a big difference. And I'm looking at your headphones thinking there's something that makes you stand out. People
Yeah.
remember you now. So
Mm.
what other little things are there?
Well, in terms of the relationship side of the podcasting, I like to do some things that really don't take me much time or effort. In fact, sometimes they actually save me time and effort and make it easier for me to do things, but they really have a great impact. For example, I talk a lot about don't use templated emails just to respond to something, but I do use templated emails. The way I use them, though, is I have templates that I then insert something very personal. So, for example, when somebody has been on my show, immediately afterwards, I'll send them a thank you note that is a templated note. Inside of that templated note, I will put a voice recording that I record immediately after the show. So I'll say, hey, Ted, I really enjoyed being on your Tuesdays with Ted live show. Loved our chat about all things podcasting, and I might remind them on my show, I might remind them about an introduction to the guest that they suggested and tell them about when the show will publish and a few other logistical bits and pieces. But that takes me maybe 1 or 2 minutes for the length. It's basically just the length of that recording.
Yeah.
Is the time that it takes me, and then I insert that recording into the template. So I've got the template. It's really easy to do, but it's very personalized and it's different. So people don't often get that voice recording. Probably a week later or in the following week, I will follow up with a video recording, which is personalized. So I'll jump on, turn on my video camera, record myself just saying, hey, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with my audience. Here's the date and time and episode number we're planning to share. Here's what you'll get from us when we do publish it. And please do stay in touch and let me know if there's anything else that you need from us to help promote the episode. So it's just a little thing that takes me a few minutes to do, but really stays in the mind of the guests because they don't often get a video message thanking them for being on the show. And then we keep in touch regularly. So we have a system that just reminds me it's time to get back in touch with Ted and just say hello and check in. So to keep that conversation going. So a whole range of little things that contribute to keeping the relationship, just keeping the conversation alive.
It's not hard. Like you said, it only takes a minute or two, but you set up a system.
Yeah,
You've got a template. You create a short little video. You can even just pick up your phone and send a LinkedIn message to people.
exactly. Yeah.
And then to keep in touch with them. That's kind of why you're on the show. I was on yours, and now you're on my show. It works really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, people just don't think about building that system, I think, and just, I have to record a video. I have to get my hair cut and this and that. There are a million excuses.
Yeah, that's right. It's so we've set up our little office so that it's very easy just to hit the record button. The lighting is going to be correct, so we've just positioned the windows over here. So we've just positioned the computer and the camera so that there's light from the window, although at the moment I've got artificial lights on because it's still a little bit dark outside. So all of that's set up, ready to go, so that if I decide to send someone a video message, it's just click the record button and we're away.
And what kind of microphones do you have? I see you have 2 microphones.
2 microphones. That's another interesting story. So they're Audio-Technica 2100s, which is a fairly inexpensive microphone, but very good quality. And we had, I used to do pre-COVID, I used to do a lot of on-site recording of conversations with other people. So I had the two microphones. But in the studio, I was just using one of them. What I found, particularly if I was doing a solo episode, so I'm standing at my desk right now, so I can kind of wander away. And what I found was that I would kind of rock from side to side quite a lot if I was doing a solo episode in particular, because I wasn't focused on looking at the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, the volume would kind of go up and down. And I thought, I've got the mixer. I've got two microphones. I can just plug them in. I just needed this little bar to add to the stand. Did that, and that solved the variation in volume problem. And then everybody now comments, like they comment on the headphones, they comment on the two microphones. That's my point of difference. And also they often comment on the quality of the sound, so which is very important, as you know, to podcasters.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. I have one microphone right here, but I get the idea because I know a lot of times you hear people, they're moving around, they're excited, presenting,
Yeah, yeah.
and the sound comes and goes. It's a great tip. So how can people learn more about what you do and how you can help people?
Well, the best place is to go to innovabiz.co, which is our website. On the website, you'll find our complete Flywheel program in audio form, which you can get access to by signing up there. It's complimentary. And also there's a little speech bubble that comes up at the bottom, which is a short video of me just saying hello and asking you what brought you here at the moment. And you have the ability to respond to me there by text, so typing something in, or by audio message, or by video message. So you have 3 buttons there, and that gives you the ability to begin or continue that conversation with me there through the website. So I certainly encourage people to go and take a look at the website, innovabiz.co.
Yeah, I'll add that to the comments. It's just going to LinkedIn, YouTube, and my Facebook page right now live. So we'll make
Wonderful.
it easy for
And
people to get in touch with you.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. And thank you for having me as a guest on your show.
thank you, Ted. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation as well. So I'll link to the episode number. I can't recall what episode number it was off the top of my head now, but I'll link to that in the comments as well.
Cool. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ted.